Hello and welcome to Paragon's Favorite Stuff, where we show you all of the things that we love to have aboard our 42-foot sailboat named Paragon. Today I'm going to talk about wind vanes and how they're different from autopilots. And then later we're going to unbox a brand new Hydrovane wind vane. A wind vane is this amazing contraption that you install on the stern of your sailboat, and it can keep your boat on a steady course indefinitely, and it doesn't require any electricity to do it. You just get your boat under sail, get on a steady course, and then adjust your wind vane to point into the eye of the apparent wind. And then, boom, the wind vane takes over and steers your boat on a steady course relative to the apparent wind, and it can probably do this better than you can hand steer. A lot of long-distance offshore voyagers use wind vanes to steer their boats for hundreds or even thousands of nautical miles without ever needing to hand steer and without ever requiring any electricity, which is just amazing. Some of the greatest sailing legends in history, like Francis Chichester, Sir Robert Knox Johnston, and Bernard Moitessier, used wind vanes to steer their boats on their groundbreaking circumnavigations. There are basically two different types of wind vanes, but before I get into that, first I want to talk a little bit about the other way of keeping your boat on course, which is with an electric autopilot. Unlike a wind vane, which can only steer a boat on a steady course relative to the apparent wind direction, autopilots typically steer boats on a compass heading. They do this by having a rod which pushes a boat's tiller back and forth, or by using some sort of belt to turn a boat's wheel, or by having a rod that attaches to a boat's steering quadrant to turn the rudder directly. More sophisticated autopilots can be integrated with GPS and then steer towards a GPS waypoint. Some of the more advanced ones can be integrated with wind sensors so that, like a wind vane, they can also steer a course relative to the wind direction. Unlike wind vanes, though, autopilots do require electricity to work. So if you're on a long passage and you're using an autopilot, then you've got to have some way to generate that electricity. Nowadays, if a professional racing sailboat has self-steering aboard, then it's probably using a sophisticated autopilot of some kind and not a wind vane. But wind vanes are still very popular on recreational sailboats that do long-distance offshore passages, and for some very good reasons. The biggest one of which is probably because they don't use any electricity. All wind vanes have one thing in common, which is a big vane that sticks up in the air on the top and looks like a big paddle. You can rotate this vane to the left or to the right. And what you do is you get your boat on course and then you rotate this vane until it's pointing into the eye of the apparent wind. Now, when the vane is pointing into the eye of the wind, say the apparent wind is over here and you point it right into the wind, when it does that, the vane sticks straight up. If the boat goes off course, then this apparent wind direction will change, and if it hits the vane on one side, then it'll tilt it over like that. And then if it hits it from the other side, then it will tilt it over in the other direction. And the rest of the wind vane contraption converts this tilting of the vane in the air to turning the boat to get the vane to get pointed back into the eye of the wind and getting it to point straight up again. So for example, let's say that I'm the sailboat and I'm sailing towards you. The point of sail doesn't matter so much, but for this example, let's say that we're on a beam reach, so the wind's coming from over here. You take that vane and you rotate it so that it's pointing directly into the eye of the wind. And when you do that, the vane will be pointing straight up all by itself. Then say, for example, the boat goes off course a little bit to port. So as the boat turns, The vane turns with the boat. The wind is still over here. Now it's hitting that vane from the side, making it tilt over. When the vane tilts over like that, it's telling the rest of the contraption to steer the boat to starboard. And as the boat does turn to starboard, the vane returns to the upright position. Likewise, if the boat turns a little bit to starboard, then the wind is now hitting that vane on the other side, making it tilt over like that. That tells the rest of the contraption to turn the boat to port, and as it does, it returns the vane into the eye of the wind and it sticks up again. How the wind vane actually turns the boat depends on the type of wind vane. There are two different designs that are commonly in use today. The most popular design is called the SERVO pendulum wind vane. In the SERVO pendulum wind vane, there's a blade that sticks straight down into the water. As the vane in the air tilts to one side or the other, it rotates that blade in the water. And just like how the wind tilted the vane to one side or the other, when the blade in the water rotates, the water kicks it out to one side or the other side. And then this blade in the water is connected to lines that go through blocks and then are connected to the tiller to pull the tiller to one side or the other, or to a drum that's on the steering wheel to turn the wheel one way or the other. I'm always amazed that someone could actually invent this and get it to work. Another amazing thing is that the windier it gets, the better it steers. Some of the most popular servo pendulum wind vanes are made by Aries, Monitor, and Cape Horn, but there are many others. I had one of the original Aries wind vanes on my previous boat, a Westsail 32, and it was just amazing. The original Aries company made several different models of wind vane, and the one that I had was their most capable one. It was called the lift-up model. I used it to steer my boat for tens of thousands of nautical miles, and on a lot of long-distance passages, it steered basically for 100% of the entire way, like a champ. Also, the world-renowned offshore sailor Eric Forsyth had one of those same Aries lift-up models on his Westsail 42 named Fiona, and he sailed for many hundreds of thousands of nautical miles using it. Unfortunately, the original Aries wind vane company went out of business. There is a new Aries wind vane company that's continuing to sell Aries wind vanes, but they don't sell that original lift-up model that I used before. When I got my current boat, a Westsail 42, I bought one of the new models, but I could never get it to steer my boat as well as the old lift-up model did on my previous boat. I'm not sure if that's because I received a defective unit or because I did something wrong with the installation, but ultimately I just could not get that particular model to steer my boat very well. The other type of wind vane design is called an auxiliary rudder wind vane. It works very differently than the servo pendulum design. You still have that vane in the air that you point into the apparent wind, but you don't have that blade in the water that gets kicked to one side or the other, pulling lines that are attached to your tiller or your wheel. Instead, as that vane in the air tilts from one side to the other, it turns an actual second auxiliary rudder directly that's a part of the wind vane itself. It amazes me that auxiliary rudder wind vanes can even work. It seems like it shouldn't be physically possible for this to work, but it's not, because there are lots of auxiliary rudder wind vanes out there that have successfully completed the longest passages. With an auxiliary rudder wind vane, you get your boat on course, get the sails balanced, point the vane into the eye of the apparent wind, and then lock your boat's main rudder in place. Then the auxiliary rudder steers the boat. There are only two auxiliary rudder wind vane companies that I'm aware of. One is a German company called Windpilot, and the other is a Canadian company called Hydrovane. One advantage that an auxiliary rudder windvane has over a servo pendulum windvane is that there are no lines that go from that blade in the water to the tiller or the wheel, which could chafe and eventually break. Another huge advantage, though, is that if anything goes wrong with your boat's main rudder, then you can use the auxiliary rudder as a backup emergency rudder to get back to port. And I think that one feature alone is a game changer. After we pushed off from Greenland to sail directly to Ireland, we broke our steering cables, and it was one of the most stressful experiences I've ever had at sea. If you want to see what happened on that day, then you can click on the link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Since then, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we would handle another steering breakdown offshore. And being able to use the Hydrovane's rudder as an emergency steering rudder is one of the main reasons why I just purchased it. Here it is in 5 big boxes right here in the pilot berth. In the rest of this video, we're going to do an unboxing. But first, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsor for this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands of great classes on a huge variety of topics. If there's a particular skill that you want to learn, then you'll probably find a class on it at Skillshare. I've recently been taking a lot of classes at Skillshare to learn how to sew on my new Singer heavy-duty sewing machine. But I also came across another class on hand sewing, and boy, am I glad that I did. The class is called Hand Sewing Basics, Work Wonders with Fabric, Needle, and Thread, and it was created by filmmaker and dress historian Bernadette Banner. In the class, Bernadette teaches sewing techniques for mending or sewing garments by hand. The class was really fun to take, and I learned a lot. Now I understand that even if you don't have a sewing machine, you can still sew just about anything by hand with nothing more than a needle and some thread, which, as Bernadette says, makes it one of the essential badass apocalypse skills. I think that being able to sew by hand is going to come in really handy as we continue to sail all over the Atlantic. What new skill would you like to learn? The first 1,000 people to use the link or my code DrakeParagon will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Click on the link in the video description and start your free trial today. When you buy a Hydrovane, they work with you over the phone and through email to make sure that they send you the right brackets for attaching it to the stern of your boat, and also, very importantly, the right length of shaft to connect the auxiliary rudder to the drive unit. And I really appreciated this because I wasn't convinced that I would be able to install one of these on my boat because we have a big radar arch on the stern, and I wasn't sure if the vane would have the clearance it would need as it tilts from one side to the other. I thought it might hit that radar arch. Hydrovane asked me to send them a bunch of photographs of the stern and the arch and also send a bunch of measurements. And after they reviewed it, they assured me that the vane would have no problems clearing that radar arch. And so I made the purchase. Here are all of the boxes that Hydrovane sent to me. Even though they're based in Canada, they do all of their manufacturing in Nottingham, England. So these boxes didn't have that far to be shipped to me here in Scotland. The boxes look really well made and sturdy. Let's open them up. This is the vane assembly. It's made up of this, which is the vane itself, and this cover. They sell different versions of the vane, and this one is called the stubby. It's not as tall as the other one. This cover goes over it like this. And then you feed this string through these eyes and tighten it down onto the bottom part of the vane. This is the part that you mount on the top of the windvane, and then you rotate it to point directly into the eye of the wind. And then when the boat goes off course, it gets blown over to one side or to the other side. We'll just put the vane assembly right over here. This is a bit heavy. Wow. This is the auxiliary rudder. 44 inches tall, 12 inches wide at the top. What you do is you lock your boat's main rudder in place and then engage the hydrovane, and this steers your boat. Okay, now for the biggest box. This is a spare vane cover, so I guess they gave me an extra. Well, that's cool. This is the offshore spares kit. It's in the installation. We'll get more into what this exactly is. This is one of the brackets that's used to attach the entire hydrovane to the stern. There are these two holes here for bolts to through bolt this part to the stern, and then there's this hole here for the shaft to go through, and on the bottom of the shaft you have the rudder, and on the top of the shaft you have the drive unit, which is this part right here. Here's the installation manual. There are some nuts in the bag with the manual for your convenience, and to help prevent thread galling we're including this package of test nuts. These are non-stainless steel nuts and should be used when temporarily bolting the brackets in place as you determine positioning. However, you must use the Nylock stainless steel nuts for final assembly. Congratulations on your purchase of a new hydrovane. We know that you will be very pleased with your additional crew member. Please feel free to contact us anytime with whatever questions you may have, especially if you are having any difficulty, and we always enjoy feedback about the hydrovane. The Curry family consider our offshore sailing trips to be among the richest and most memorable times of our lives. Will and his wife Sarah continue to live the wonderful cruising life now as a young family. We know what it's all about, and we wish you all the best. Most sincerely, John E. Curry, Will Curry, Sarah Curry. Cool. This is the block and line for controlling the hydrovane from the cockpit. You take this line and you run it as a loop in between the hydrovane on the stern and this block, which is somewhere close to the cockpit, and then you can grab this line and pull it one way or pull it the other way, and that will adjust the orientation of the vane on top to get your boat to steer a little bit more to port or a little bit more to starboard. This is the drive unit. This is where all the magic happens. This thing has the vane attached up top here, and the shaft gets attached here, and then the shaft gets connected to the stern with two brackets. I just showed you one of them. This is the gearing that takes the orientation of the vane in the air and translates it to steering the auxiliary rudder. Oh, looks like there's been some damage though. I don't know how that could have happened. This is the knob for something. We will find out what that knob's for, and I hope we can get a replacement soon. Very heavy. Not exactly sure what it is. This is a backing plate kit. The backing plate kit has 3 of these aluminum backing plates and 6 of these bolts with Nylock nuts. And there, for attaching the brackets onto the hull, you drill a hole through the hull and through the backing plate, and then you send the bolt through the bracket, through the hull, through the backing plate, and then put the nut on the other side. So these are used to spread the load of the bracket on the hull itself. These are the broken pieces of that knob. So we've got the drive unit, the H bracket, the block and line for steering from the cockpit, the lead counterweight, the backing plate kit, offshore spares kit, spare vane cover, installation manual. And I just figured out what this thing is. This is actually a tiller. It connects into the drive assembly somewhere in there somehow, and it's for the scenario where you lose your main steering and have to use a Hydrovane as a backup emergency rudder to get back to port. You can hold this part and move it like this to control the Hydrovane's auxiliary rudder. You can also put a pipe into here to extend it so that you can have more leverage. Just 2 more boxes to go. This is the A bracket. It is the strongest of the 3 types of brackets that they sell. These 2 parts get through bolted to the hull, and then they connect together here with this piece, and then the shaft goes through that hole. Everything gets tightened up and secured. This one will go up top, and the shaft will go through it and then down to this hole on the bottom, and the rudder's underneath all that, and then the drive unit is above. It's really heavy duty looking. Not sure what this is made of, but I bet it's plenty strong. And the last box. Ooh. This is the shaft. The outer part here gets secured inside of the brackets which hold them onto the stern of the boat, and then you have an inner tube that turns. One end is connected to the rudder and the other end is connected to the drive unit. So the drive unit turns the tube inside the shaft, and then it turns the rudder on the other end. The length is 77 inches long, which is sized for my boat. There's just one more thing I'll need to get for this installation, and that's a custom-made pad that will go onto this part of the bracket, in between the bracket and the hull. The pad has to be shaved down to match the curvature of the hull, and it has to be made of teak or starboard. So I'll need to make one for this bracket and 2 more for the 2 hull attachment points on this other big A bracket. I don't think we'll have time to install the Hydrovane here in Scotland because we're going to push off in just a few more weeks and sail on to the Faroe Islands. I hope we'll have time to install it in Faroe before we push off again to sail on to Shetland, Denmark, Germany, and Poland. If you'd like more information about the Hydrovane, then check out the link we've included in the video description. And if there's anything aboard our boat that you'd like us to cover, then just let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.